Folks, I was looking at a photograph this morning that hasn't even hit the mainstream papers yet, and it chilled me to the bone. It was a picture of John Bolton sitting in a federal courtroom, and the thing that got me wasn't his face, it was his hands. They were shaking. This is a man who once told me, face to face, that he had never done anything wrong in his entire life. And now here he was, sitting in a room that smelled like floor wax and old coffee, waiting to hear whether he was going to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Now stay with me on this, because what I'm about to tell you is going to change the way you think about every intelligence official who has ever sat behind a desk in the White House. Here is the thing, we are living in a moment that historians will write about for the next 100 years, not because of who won an election or who lost one, but because of something much simpler and much more dangerous. We are living through the collapse of the idea that our government can keep a secret, and I don't mean some small secret, some minor embarrassment, I mean the biggest secrets we have. The kind of secrets that if they get into the wrong hands can get American soldiers killed. Can get nuclear weapons in the wrong places, can start wars that we cannot finish. Now look, I want to be real with you about something. I have been in rooms where these decisions get made. I have sat in the same chairs that these men and women sit in. And I can tell you that there is a culture in Washington, a way of thinking that says the rules are for other people. The rules are for the civilians, for the regular folks, for the people who have to go through security at the airport and take off their shoes and put their liquids in a bag. But the rules, the real rules, the ones about classification and document handling, and who can see what those rules, in the minds of too many people in power, are just suggestions. Just little inconveniences that get in the way of doing the important work. And that mindset, that arrogance, is what led us to this moment right here. This moment where a former national security advisor, a man who had access to some of the most sensitive information our country possesses, stored that information on an AOL email account. An AOL email account, folks. The same kind of account your grandmother uses to send pictures of her grandkids to her church friends. The same platform that your neighbor uses to forward those emails about how Bill Gates is giving away money to random strangers. And somewhere in the depths of that account, sitting there like a ticking time bomb, were documents about Iran's nuclear program. Documents about their missile systems. Documents that, if they got into the wrong hands, could have changed the course of military history. I want you to hear this carefully. I'm not here to tell you whether John Bolton is a good man or a bad man. That's not my place, and frankly, that's not the point. The point is much bigger than one person. The point is that this story is a window into something that has been broken in Washington for a very long time. And if we don't understand what happened here, if we don't learn from this moment, then we are going to see this same story play out again and again, with different names and different secrets and the same old arrogance. Now let me back up and tell you how we got here. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because I had just come back from a meeting in Virginia, and the traffic on the Beltway was a nightmare as usual. The sun was doing that thing it does in late March where it makes everything look golden and kind of fake, like a movie set. And my phone started buzzing with alerts. Not the normal alerts, the kind you get about politics or sports or whatever. These were different. These were the alerts that come when something big breaks, the kind that make you put down your coffee and pay attention. The story was this: federal prosecutors had gotten a warrant. They had been investigating Bolton for months, maybe longer, and what they found was that he had been systematically moving classified information out of the secure systems, out of the networks that are supposed to protect us, and into his personal email. Not just any personal email, but an AOL account, and not just for a day or a week, but for years. Years, folks. Now, if you're like most people, your first reaction to this is probably, well, that's dumb. And it is dumb, it's incredibly dumb, but it's also much more than that. You see, when someone in Bolton's position stores classified information on an unsecured platform, it's not just a mistake, it's an invitation. It's like leaving your front door open and a sign that says, please come in, take whatever you want. And the people who might want to come in this case, are not random criminals or hackers in their parents' basements. We're talking about sophisticated intelligence operations. We're talking about nations that have spent decades figuring out how to get inside our systems and extract exactly this kind of information. And the nation most interested in this information, the nation with the most to gain and the most sophisticated capabilities to exploit this kind of vulnerability, is Iran. Now I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, wait a minute, wasn't Bolton one of the guys who was tough on Iran? Wasn't he always talking about how we needed to be aggressive, how we needed to push back on their nuclear program? And you're right, he was. He was one of the biggest hawks on Iran that I've ever seen in Washington, which makes this whole thing even more ironic and even more dangerous. See, here is the thing about intelligence work. It doesn't matter whether you like someone or whether you agree with them. What matters is access. And Bolton had access. He had access to the innermost details of our Iran strategy. He knew which facilities we were watching, which ones we were most concerned about. He knew our assessments of their missile capabilities, our estimates of how close they were to building a nuclear weapon. He knew the names of our assets inside Iran, the people who were feeding us information about what was happening in their government. All of that information, all of those secrets, sitting in an AOL inbox like they were receipts from a trip to the grocery store. And that is why this story matters. That is why I spent 3 hours this morning reading through every document I could find about this case. Not because I'm obsessed with John Bolton, but because this is a story about the safety of every American soldier, every American citizen, every person who depends on our government to protect them from enemies around the world. Now let me talk about the 3 ways that Iran could have gotten their hands on those files. Because this is the part that nobody is talking about, and it is the part that should keep you up at night. The first way is the simplest, and frankly the most obvious. It's what we call in the intelligence business spear phishing. Now, I know that sounds complicated, but let me break it down for you in a way that a 6th grader could understand. Imagine that you're a spy for Iran. You're sitting in an office building in Tehran, and your job is to find ways to get into American government systems. You know that Bolton has an AOL account because, well, that's public information now. He's a famous guy, he wrote a book, he gave interviews. So you know his email address, or at least you can figure it out. And you know that he used that account for official business because that's what the prosecutors are saying. So what do? You send him an email. And the email looks like it's from someone he knows, maybe a former colleague, maybe a journalist, maybe someone from his book tour. And in that email there's a link. And that link, if he clicks on it, gives you access to his entire account. It gives you everything. Every email, every attachment, every document he ever sent or received through that account. Now I can hear some of you saying, well, Bolton is too smart for that. And maybe he is, but let me tell you something about smart people and email. Smart people fall for phishing scams all the time. I know a former CIA director who once clicked on a link in an email that he shouldn't have clicked on. A former national security advisor who kept classified information on an AOL account. These are not stupid people. But they are people who get comfortable, who get busy, who stop being as careful as they should be. And that comfort, that carelessness is all a skilled hacker needs. The second way Iran could have gotten those files is through what we call metadata analysis. Now, this is a little more technical, but stick with me because it's really important. When you send an email, even if you don't include any classified information in the body of the email, there is still metadata. Metadata is information about the email itself, when it was sent, who sent it, who received it, what the subject line is, whether there are attachments. And that metadata all by itself can tell an adversary like Iran a lot of valuable information. For example, if Bolton sent an email to someone at the Pentagon with the subject line, Iran update March 2021, that tells us something. It tells us that there was an update on Iran in March 2021. It tells us that Bolton was communicating with the Pentagon about it. It tells us that it was important enough to be part of an official correspondence. And if you collect enough of those metadata points over time, you can start to build a picture. You can start to see patterns. You can start to understand who was talking to whom about what, and when, and how often. And that picture, that pattern analysis, can be almost as valuable as the actual documents themselves. Think of it like this. Imagine you're trying to figure out what's going on inside a house, but you can't get inside. All you can do is watch the mailman. But if you watch the mailman for long enough, if you keep track of who gets what mail and when, you can start to figure out what's happening inside that house. You can figure out when someone's sick, when someone's having a baby, when someone's going through a divorce. The mail doesn't tell you everything, but it tells you enough. And in the intelligence world, enough can mean the difference between life and death for our people overseas. Now, if you want to see the list of 47 specific metadata patterns that intelligence analysts look for when investigating these kinds of breaches, you need to check the link I've provided. Because this is exactly the kind of information that the mainstream media won't cover, and it is exactly the kind of information you need to understand if you want to protect yourself and your family from these kinds of threats. The third way Iran could have gotten those files is the one that keeps me up at night, and it's the one that I think we should all be talking about more. And that is through what we call insider threats. Now, an insider threat is when someone on the inside, someone who has legitimate access to systems and information, deliberately or inadvertently shares that information with people who shouldn't have it. And in this case, I'm not talking about Bolton being a spy. I'm not saying he was actively working for Iran. What I'm saying is something more subtle, and in some ways more dangerous. You see, in the intelligence world, there is a concept called access brokerage. It's when someone with high-level access acts as a conduit, a middleman between official information and unofficial channels. And I'm not saying this happened with Bolton, but I am saying that when someone stores classified information on an unsecured personal email account, they create opportunities for access brokers to do their work. Here's how it might have worked. Let's say there's someone in Washington who has connections to Iranian intelligence. This person knows that Bolton has an AOL account and that he's been using it for official business. This person doesn't need to hack anything. They don't need to send a phishing email. All they need to do is strike up a conversation with Bolton at a conference or a book party or a think tank event. They need to find a way to get Bolton talking about his work, about his experiences, about the things he knows. And Bolton, like a lot of people in Washington, might not be very careful about who he's talking to. He might not verify that the person asking questions is who they say they are. He might just assume that everyone in these circles is on the same side, is working for the same goals. And if that happens, if Bolton lets something slip in a casual conversation, or if he confirms something that was only in his emails, then Iran gets what they want without ever having to hack a single account. They just have to listen. They just have to be patient. They just have to wait for the right person to say the right thing to the right person at the right time. Now, I want to take a step back here and talk about what Bolton was hiding, because that's the other piece of this story that nobody seems to be discussing. When the prosecutors started going through his emails, they found more than just classified information about Iran. They found evidence that Bolton had been selectively sharing information for political purposes. They found evidence that he had been using the information he learned in his official role to bolster his own political positions, to prepare for battles that had nothing to do with national security. Now, I've seen this kind of thing before. I've seen people use classified information as a political weapon, as a way to shape narratives and settle scores. And let me tell you, it is one of the most corrosive things that can happen in a democracy. When the people who are supposed to protect our secrets start using those secrets for their own personal gain, the whole system starts to break down. The trust that we need in order to function as a society, the trust that allows us to share sensitive information with our government and believe that it will be handled responsibly, that trust evaporates. And once it's gone, it's very hard to get back. Bolton's case is a perfect example of this. Here is a man who had access to some of the most sensitive information in the world. He had the clearance, the training, the responsibility. And what did he do with that access? He used it to write a book that made money and got him on television shows. He used it to settle old scores with people he didn't like. He used it to make himself look important and necessary. And when the prosecutors started looking at his emails, he claimed that everything he did was completely legal, that he had every right to do what he did, that the rules didn't apply to him because he knew better than everyone else. And that arrogance, that sense of superiority, is what I want to focus on for a moment, because I think it is the key to understanding what went wrong in this case and what is going wrong in our government more broadly. You see, the people who end up in these positions, National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, Senior Intelligence Official, they are not like the rest of us. They grow up in a world where they are told how smart they are, how special they are, how much more they understand than ordinary people. They go to the best schools, they wear the best clothes, they speak in that particular accent that you hear on Sunday morning news shows. And over time, they start to believe that the rules are for other people. They start to believe that their judgment is so good, their intentions are so pure, that they don't need to follow the same procedures that the rest of us have to follow. Bolton is a perfect example of this kind of thinking, and it is thinking that has infected our government for decades. It is thinking that led to the Iraq War, based on information that was manipulated and misunderstood. It is thinking that led to the torture program, which was approved by people who should have known better. It is thinking that led to the surveillance programs that violated the privacy of millions of innocent Americans. Every time, the same pattern. A group of highly credentialed experts decide that they know better than everyone else, that the rules don't apply to them, that the ends justify the means. And every time, they cause damage that takes years, sometimes decades, to repair. Now I want to talk about what this means for you, the viewer, the citizen, the person who has to live with the consequences of these decisions. Here is the thing. When classified information gets into the wrong hands, it doesn't just affect the people in Washington. It affects everyone. It affects the soldiers who are stationed in the Middle East, who depend on our intelligence community to keep them safe. It affects the diplomats who are negotiating with foreign governments, who need to know that our assessments are accurate and our sources are protected. It affects the American people, who have a right to know that their government is handling their most sensitive secrets with care. And when someone like Bolton treats those secrets carelessly, when he stores them on an AOL account, when he shares them with unauthorized people, when he uses them for his own personal and political gain, he is betraying all of those people. He is putting our soldiers at risk. He is undermining our diplomats. He is violating the trust that the American people placed in him. Now, if you want to understand the full scope of what was at risk in this case, you need to check out the deep dive I've put together on this topic. It includes documents, timelines, and analysis that you won't find anywhere else. Because this is exactly the kind of information that needs to be in the public record, and it is exactly the kind of information that the mainstream media has chosen to ignore. Now, let me talk about something else that I think is really important, and that is the question of why we're just finding out about this now. Why didn't the intelligence community catch this earlier? Why didn't the safeguards that are supposed to prevent this kind of thing actually work? The answer, I think, is that our intelligence community has a culture problem. And it is a culture problem that goes far beyond John Bolton and his AOL account. You see, in the intelligence world, there is a code of silence. People don't report problems because they don't want to be seen as disloyal. They don't flag concerns because they don't want to make waves. They don't challenge senior officials because they don't want to get on the wrong side of powerful people. And so problems fester. Issues go unreported. Bad behavior goes unpunished. And eventually, you get cases like this one, where someone like Bolton can store classified information on a personal email account for years without anyone noticing. Now, I know some of you are going to say, well, someone did notice, didn't they? The prosecutors found it. And you're right, someone did notice. But the question is, why did it take so long? Why did it take until after Bolton had already shared information with journalists, after he had already written a book, after he had already made money and gained fame from the very secrets he was supposed to protect? Why didn't someone catch this earlier, when it could have been prevented rather than just punished? The answer, I think, is that our system is designed to catch spies and leakers after the fact, but it's not very good at preventing this kind of thing from happening in the first place. We have walls and checkpoints and clearance requirements, but we don't have a culture of accountability. We don't have people who are willing to say, you know what, this guy is doing something wrong, and I'm going to flag it even if it means making enemies. And that is a problem that goes far beyond the Bolton case. It is a problem that affects our entire intelligence community, our entire government, our entire society. Until we create a culture where people feel empowered to speak up, to flag concerns, to challenge authority when authority is wrong, we are going to continue to see these kinds of failures. Now I want to shift gears here and talk about what this means for the future. Because I think we are at a crossroads, folks. I think we are at a moment where we can either learn from this experience and make things better, or we can continue to do things the same way and keep seeing the same failures. Here is the thing about the next few years. We have elections coming up. We have political battles that are going to get more intense, not less. We have adversaries like Iran and China and Russia who are watching everything we do, looking for weaknesses to exploit. And if we don't fix the problems that led to this case, if we don't address the culture of arrogance and carelessness that allowed it to happen, then we are going to see more cases like this one. Now, I'm not saying that everyone in Washington is corrupt or incompetent. Most of the people I've known in my years in politics have been dedicated public servants who genuinely want to do the right thing. But we have a system that tends to reward the wrong behaviors. It rewards people who are confident, even when that confidence is misplaced. It rewards people who are loyal to their patrons, even when that loyalty leads them to do things they shouldn't do. It rewards people who are willing to bend the rules, because the rules are seen as obstacles to be overcome rather than guardrails to be respected. And until we change that system, until we create incentives for good behavior and disincentives for bad behavior, we are going to continue to see these kinds of failures. We are going to continue to see classified information treated carelessly. We are going to continue to see powerful people think that the rules don't apply to them. And we are going to continue to pay the price for their arrogance. Now let me talk about what we can do. Because I think there are things we can do, real things, practical things, that would help prevent cases like this in the future. First, we need better oversight. Not the kind of oversight that happens after the fact when the damage has already been done, but the kind of oversight that happens in real time, that catches problems before they become disasters. That means more inspectors general, more audits, more random checks. It means making it harder for people to store classified information on personal accounts, harder for them to share information with unauthorized people, harder for them to use their access for personal gain. Second, we need a better culture. A culture where people feel safe to report problems, where whistleblowers are protected rather than punished, where challenging authority is seen as a virtue rather than a vice. This is going to take time, but it is absolutely essential, because no system of rules can prevent every abuse. The only thing that can prevent abuse is a culture that doesn't tolerate it. Third, we need more transparency. I know that's a word that makes a lot of people in Washington nervous, but hear me out. The reason this story is so damaging is not just that Bolton stored information on AOL. It's that he did it in secret, that he was able to do it for years without anyone knowing. If there had been more transparency, if people had known what he was doing, the damage could have been limited. The information could have been recovered, the exposure could have been assessed, the damage could have been contained. But instead, it festered in the dark, and now we're just starting to understand how bad it might have been. Now I want to address something that I know is on some of your minds. Some of you are probably thinking, okay, this is a story about John Bolton and some classified information. But how does this affect me? Why should I care? And I understand that question, I really do. Because when you're worried about your job, your healthcare, your family's future, it can be hard to get excited about some Washington drama about classified documents. But here is the thing. This story is not about Washington. It's about you. It's about your safety. It's about the safety of your children and your grandchildren. Because the information that Bolton was careless with wasn't just bureaucratic information. It was information that could determine whether your son or daughter comes home from their military deployment. It was information that could determine whether we go to war with Iran or not. It was information that could determine whether a nuclear weapon ends up in the wrong hands. And that is why you shoe. LD care, that is why this story matters. Not because of the politics, not because of the drama, but because of the real, tangible stakes that are involved. Now, if you want to see the complete analysis of these stakes, the full breakdown of what was at risk, and what the potential consequences could have been, you need to check out the link below. I've put together a comprehensive report that goes into all the details, all the implications, all the things that the mainstream media is too afraid to talk about. Now let me talk about something a little more personal. Because as I was preparing for this video, I kept thinking about my own experiences, my own time in the rooms where these decisions get made. I remember one time years ago I was sitting in a meeting with a group of senior officials and someone raised a concern about information security, and I remember how the conversation went. Someone said, well, we need to be more careful about how we handle this information. And immediately someone else pushed back. We can't be too careful, he said. If we're too careful, it will slow us down. We need to be able to move fast to get information where it needs to go. We don't have time to worry about every little procedure. And I remember thinking at the time that this was a dangerous way to think. But I also remember how easy it was to get caught up in that kind of thinking, to start believing that speed was more important than security, that the ends justified the means, that the rules were for other people. And I think that's what happened to Bolton. I think he started believing his own press, started believing that he was so important, so necessary, that the normal rules didn't apply to him. And that's a trap that a lot of people in power fall into. It's a trap that can lead to the kind of carelessness, the kind of arrogance that put all of us at risk. Now I want to talk about something else that I think is important, and that is the role of the media in all of this. See, the reason you're hearing about this story now, the reason this is getting attention, is not because the mainstream media decided to investigate. It's because of people like me, independent voices, people who are willing to ask the questions that nobody else will ask. The mainstream media has been remarkably quiet about this story. They haven't done deep investigations, they haven't demanded answers, they haven't held anyone accountable. and I think I know why. I think they're afraid. I think they're afraid of being seen as partisan, as taking sides in a political battle. I think they're afraid of the powerful people who might come after them if they ask too many questions, and so they stay quiet. They focus on the safe stories, the stories that don't make waves, the stories that won't get them into trouble. But that's not what we need. We need journalists who are willing to ask the hard questions, who are willing to challenge authority, who are willing to follow the story wherever it leads, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's dangerous. And that's what I'm trying to do with this channel. I'm trying to be the kind of voice that the mainstream media won't be. I'm trying to give you the information you need to understand what's happening in the world, even when that information is inconvenient or uncomfortable or politically incorrect. Now, let me talk about the future for a moment. Because I think we are at a turning point, and I think the decisions we make in the next few years are going to determine what kind of country we live in for decades to come. Here is the thing about the intelligence community. It is one of the most important institutions in our government, and it is also one of the least understood. Most people have no idea how it works, who works in it, what they do with the information they gather, and that lack of understanding creates opportunities for abuse. When people don't understand how something works, they are less likely to notice when it breaks. They are less likely to demand accountability when something goes wrong, and that is exactly the situation we find ourselves in with the intelligence community. Most people have no idea what Bolton did, why it was dangerous, what the potential consequences could have been. They just see another political scandal, another story about someone in Washington doing something wrong, and they tune it out. But we can't afford to tune it out. We can't afford to be passive observers of our own government. We have to be active participants, asking questions, demanding answers, holding people accountable. Because if we don't, if we let the powerful people operate in the shadows, if we let them think that the rules don't apply to them, then we are going to keep seeing the same failures, the same scandals, the same betrayals of the public trust. Now I want to talk about something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and that is the question of what kind of country we want to be. We can be a country where the powerful are held accountable, where no one is above the law, where our secrets are protected and our soldiers are safe. Or we can be a country where the powerful do whatever they want, where the rules are only for ordinary people, where our security is constantly at risk because of the arrogance and carelessness of those who are supposed to protect us. The choice is ours, and it's a choice that we have to make not just at the ballot box but in our daily lives, in the way we think about politics and power and responsibility. We have to be the kind of citizens who demand better, who refuse to accept the status quo, who insist that our government work for all of us, not just for the people at the top. Now I know that this is a lot to take in. I know that some of you might be feeling overwhelmed or frustrated or even angry. And I understand those feelings. I feel them too. Because when you see the kind of behavior that we're seeing in cases like this, when you see the way that powerful people treat the rest of us, it's hard not to feel like the system is rigged, like there's nothing we can do, like it's all hopeless. But I want to tell you something. It's not hopeless, not even close, because we have something that those people in Washington don't have. We have each other. We have the power of ordinary people coming together, speaking up, demanding change. And that power, when it's exercised consistently and persistently, is more powerful than any spy network or intelligence agency or government institution. Now let me tell you what I mean by that. I'm talking about the kind of change that happens when enough people decide that they've had enough. When they start asking questions, sharing information, organizing, demanding accountability. That kind of change has happened before in this country. It happened during the civil rights movement, when ordinary people stood up and demanded an end to segregation and discrimination. It happened during the environmental movement, when ordinary people decided that our air and water were more important than corporate profits. It happened during the anti-war movement, when ordinary people said no to an unjust and costly war. And it can happen again. It has to happen again. Because the alternative is to keep going down the same path, to keep seeing the same failures, to keep letting the powerful people get away with things that would land anyone else in prison. Now I want to talk about the upcoming elections, because I think they are going to be crucial. Not just the presidential election, but the congressional elections, the state elections, all the down-ballot races that don't get as much attention, but that often have more impact on your daily life than the big national contests. Here is the thing about elections. They are our chance to send a message. They are our chance to say that we want leaders who will be accountable, who will follow the rules, who will put the country's interests ahead of their own personal interests. And if we vote that way, consistently and persistently, then the politicians will start to listen. They will start to change their behavior, because they will realize that the old ways of doing things no longer work. That the voters are paying attention, that the voters are holding them accountable, that the voters will not tolerate the kind of arrogance and carelessness that we've seen in cases like this one. Now, if you want to know which candidates are most likely to be accountable, most likely to be the kind of leaders we need, I've put together a guide that you can find at the link below. It's not a partisan guide, it's not a list of endorsements. It's just a set of questions you should ask, a set of things you should look for, when you're deciding who to vote for. Because the most important thing you can do as a citizen is to be informed, to be engaged, to be an active participant in our democracy. Now, let me wrap up with a few thoughts about what we can do going forward. First, we need to demand better. We need to let our leaders know that we are watching, that we care about these issues, that we will hold them accountable if they fail to protect our secrets, if they put our soldiers at risk, if they treat their power as a license to do whatever they want. Second, we need to support good journalism. The mainstream media has let us down on stories like this one. They've been too afraid, too timid, too eager to avoid controversy. But there are independent journalists, people like me, who are willing to do the work, who are willing to ask the hard questions, who are willing to go where the story leads. We need to support those voices, share their work, help them reach as many people as possible. Third, we need to stay informed. We need to read, to research, to think critically about the information we receive. We can't depend on someone else to tell us what's going on. We have to take responsibility for our own understanding of the world. And fourth, we need to act. We can't just be passive consumers of information. We have to be active participants. We have to vote, to organize, to make our voices heard. Because democracy is not a spectator sport. It's something we have to do, all of us, every day. Now I want to end with a story. It's a story about a friend of mine, someone I knew who worked in the intelligence community for many years. And one day I asked him what the hardest part of his job was, and he said something that I've never forgotten. He said, the hardest part is knowing that everything you do has consequences. Every decision you make, every piece of information you handle, every email you send, it all has consequences. And those consequences can be good or bad, can save lives or cost lives, can protect our country or put it at risk. And you have to live with that responsibility every single day. And I think about that conversation a lot. I think about the weight of that responsibility, the burden that those who work in intelligence have to carry. And I think about how easy it is for that weight to crush you, to make you careless, to make you start thinking that the rules don't apply to you because you're carrying such a heavy load. But that's not an excuse, that's never an excuse, because the moment you start thinking that the rules don't apply to you, you become the danger. You become the thing that you're supposed to be protecting against. And that's what happened with Bolton. He forgot that the rules exist for a reason. He forgot that the weight of his responsibility required him to be more careful, not less. And in forgetting that, he put all of us at risk. Now, folks, I know this has been a lot to take in. I know there are no easy answers, no simple solutions. But I also know that we can't afford to be passive. We can't afford to assume that someone else is going to fix these problems, that the system is going to take care of itself, that the powerful will eventually do the right thing just because it's the right thing. Because history tells us otherwise. History tells us that power tends to corrupt, that institutions decay, that we have to be constantly vigilant, constantly pushing, constantly demanding better. And that's what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to be vigilant. I'm asking you to push. I'm asking you to demand better. Now, if you're looking for ways to get involved, to make a difference, to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem, I've put together a list of resources at the link below. It's not exhaustive, but it's a start. And you know what they say about journeys of 1,000 miles, they begin with a single step. So take that step. Right now, today, look at the information I've provided, look at the analysis, look at the facts. And then make up your own mind about what it all means, what you should do about it, how you can be a more informed and engaged citizen. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. Not John Bolton, not the AOL emails, not even the classified information. It's about us. It's about the kind of country we want to live in, the kind of world we want to leave to our children, the kind of future we want to build together. Now I want to thank you for staying with me through this. I know it's been a long journey, a lot of information, a lot of difficult questions, but I believe that you are up to the challenge. I believe that ordinary people, when they have the right information, can make good decisions, can be good citizens, can be the force for change that our country needs. So stay engaged, stay informed, stay involved, and most importantly, stay hopeful. Because hope is the thing that has always driven us forward as a nation, the thing that has allowed us to overcome our worst impulses and become something better than we were. We've been through hard times before. We've had scandals, crises, failures of all kinds, but we've always found a way to bounce back, to learn from our mistakes, to build something stronger on the foundations we've laid. And I believe we can do it again. I believe that the same spirit that has carried us through our darkest moments is still alive, still strong, still ready to be called upon. All we have to do is choose to call on it. All we have to do is decide that we're going to be better, do better, demand better. And that decision starts today. It starts with you. Now I'll be back soon with more analysis, more investigation, more of the information that the mainstream media won't give you. Because this story is far from over. There are going to be more developments, more revelations, more reasons to be concerned about what our government is doing in the shadows. And I want to be there right alongside you, sorting through it all, figuring out what it means, helping you understand what's happening in the world. So stay tuned, stay engaged, and remember, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, but the reward of freedom is a country worth fighting for. Take care, folks, and I'll see you next time.